Hey everybody, I wanted to take a little bit of time to explain what you need to do to complete the week 2 critical thinking issue assignment. It's similar to how we did this in week 1, but it is a little different. So I do want to make sure that we understand how this one is going to work. All right, so first things first, you want to make sure that you have read through chapters 2 and 3 before you do this assignment. You're going to have 2 options for completing this assignment, right? So we covered 2 chapters this week, and each chapter has a critical thinking issue at the end. So I'm going to give you the option of which one you want to work with. So your first option is to read and answer questions about the critical thinking issue at the end of chapter 2. And that issue is perspectives on reason and proofs for the existence of God. Your other option is to read and answer questions about the critical thinking issue at the end of chapter 3, which is perspectives on free speech zones on college campuses. So you get to choose which one, right? This will be a file submission just like it was last week, right? So you have several options. If you prefer to use Microsoft Word or Google Docs, you can use one of the files attached to these instructions as your template. You can download the file, save it to your device, type and save your answers, and then upload that completed file. And if you are using that option, if you're going to use one of the files that I've attached, you got to make sure that you're using the right one. As you can see, you're going to have, now this is from my view, so it looks a little different than yours, but there will be 2 files attached to the instructions. So assignment, week 2 critical thinking issue, option 1. That's the one about reasons and proofs for the existence of God at the end of chapter 2. Or assignment, week 2 critical thinking issue, option 2. That is for the one at the end of chapter 3, free speech zones on college campuses, right? So if you're going to use my files to use as your template, right, you're going to download one of these files, type your answer, save it, and upload it. Make sure you're choosing the corresponding file, the one that goes with the issue you've chosen to work with, right? If you want to create your own file in some way, remember it can be Word doc or Google Doc, but it can also be Open Doc or a PDF. Then you can copy and paste the questions from here in the instruction area. So you'll see option 1 is from the end of chapter 2. You have these questions, and then option 2 is from the end of chapter 3. So you just copy and paste the ones that go with the issue that you've chosen to work with, right? The only file format that I cannot access is a .pages file, so please keep that in mind. Pretty much everything else I seem to be able to work with pretty easily. And then, of course, finally, this assignment will be graded using the written responses rubric that you can find under the Getting Started section if you need a reminder of what I'm looking for when I grade these. All right, so let's take a look here at the question. So if you're choosing option 1, which is the critical thinking issue at the end of chapter 2, perspectives on reason and proofs for the existence of God, the first thing you're going to want to do is read the introductory information at the beginning of that critical thinking issue section. Then you're going to read the first text, which is The Existence of God by Thomas Aquinas. Once you have read that, you're going to answer these 3 questions. How does Aquinas define the term God? And then how does Aquinas respond to the question of whether the existence of God is self-evident? And what proofs does Aquinas offer for the existence of God? Once you've read that one and answered those questions, you're going to read the second text, which is In Defense of Unbelief, Are There Fundamental Atheists? By Paul Kurtz. Then you have 4 questions to answer for that text. What is secular humanism and how is it related to fundamental atheism? Second question, why is Kurtz opposed to religion? What are some of the examples he uses to support his position? Third question, what does Kurtz mean when he says atheism can be a positive philosophical and scientific viewpoint? And finally, what is Kurtz's main quarrel, his main argument with atheism, and how does he respond to this problem? After you have read both selections and answered the questions for each one, you're then going to answer these 3 questions, thinking about both of them together. First question, are faith and reason compatible? Discuss how both Aquinas and Kurtz might respond to this question. Second question, Kurtz points out that animosity of different groups to religion in the past is the fact that so much violence has centered around religious beliefs relevant to whether or not God exists. Support your answer. And the third question, do you believe in God? If so, how do you define the term God? Create an argument supporting your belief or disbelief in the existence of God. Right? So those are the items you will read and the questions you will answer if you are choosing option 1 to work with the critical thinking issue at the end of chapter 2. If you would prefer instead to work with the critical thinking issue at the end of chapter 3, which is about free speech zones on college campuses, you will then do this section. So first, read the introductory information at the beginning of this critical thinking issue at the end of chapter 3. Then you're going to read the first text, which is Feigning Free Speech on Campus by Greg Lukanoff. You're going to answer these 3 questions. What type of organization is FIRE, and what was Lukanoff's purpose in writing this letter to the editor? That's what this is, Feigning Free Speech on Campus. He's writing a letter to the editor. What was his purpose? Second question, in what ways do college campuses restrict students' freedom of speech, according to the article? And finally, according to Lukanoff, why is freedom of speech important on college campuses? Once you've read that first selection and answered the questions, you'll move to the second one, which is Reasonable Limits Are Good by Robert J. Scott. And then you have 3 questions to answer for this text as well. According to Scott, what is the primary purpose of free speech zones? Second question, what are the benefits of having free speech zones? Again, according to Scott. Third, on what grounds does Scott argue that free speech zones are consistent with the First Amendment and with democratic principles? Once you have read both selections and answered those questions, you will then answer these 3 questions, kind of considering both texts at the same time. First question, evaluate Lukanoff's and Scott's arguments for and against free speech zones on college campuses. Evaluate which person made the stronger argument. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean who do you agree with. It means who makes the stronger argument in the piece that we read, right? Because sometimes I might not agree with another person, but I can say they made a strong argument. I could be listening to a debate, right? And inherently, I already agree more with one side over the other. But in the course of the debate, I can look at that and objectively and say, I agree with person B, but in this specific situation, person A actually made the stronger argument. They actually presented more compelling evidence and more reasonable lines of thought, etc. Right? So based on these 2 pieces that you're reading about free speech zones, who do you think made the stronger argument? Second question. The First Amendment of the Bill of Rights states, Congress shall make no law, ... abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, of the right of the people peaceably to assemble to petition government for a redress of grievances. Are free speech zones consistent with the First Amendment, as Scott argued, or do they violate it, as Lukanoff argued? And then our final question, after having considered both sides of the issue, and maybe doing more research if you want, you don't have to though, do you think there are any instances when freedom of speech should be restricted on college campuses? Think about hate speech, inflammatory speech, displays of symbols like swastika, right? So again, you have the option of working with the critical thinking issue, perspectives on reason and proof for the existence of God at the end of chapter 2, completing these questions, or working with the critical thinking issue, perspectives on free speech zones on college campuses at the end of chapter 3. Whichever one you decide to work with, only answer the question for that option. Again, remember, if you're going to use my file as your template, make sure you are downloading the correct one, right? All right, so that is due Sunday night. Reach out if you have questions. Otherwise, I look forward to reading your responses to those questions.